My name's Dave DeBow, founder of MoneyPartnerFormula.com, and this show is built for everyday real estate investors who are actively doing deals and looking to scale using other people's money. So if you're an active real estate investor and you want to get featured on this show to talk about your own real estate and capital raising experiences, then just go to daveinterviewsyou.com. Now let's get rolling with this episode, and remember to subscribe for daily interview content. Well, hey, folks, welcome back. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever gone down to Mexico on vacation? Have you gone down to the States and seen all of the cheap properties compared to Canadian prices and gone, gee whiz, I would love to buy down here, but I could still use some financing, or buying stuff in Mexico? You're thinking, I'd love this, but I need some financing. Well, if you've ever thought that, you're in for a treat today, because we've got Mr. Paul McAllister, who is not only a real estate investor himself, he also helps other investors get financing, not just in Canada, although he helps investors all across Canada get financing for deals, but also he helps Canadians to get financing in the good old US of A and even in Mexico. So, Paul, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for sharing the time. I'm
Yeah, my
excited to.
pleasure. So Paul, give us a big picture overview. Number one, of what you're doing as an active real estate investor, what your portfolio looks like. And number two, of your mortgage broker business. So let's start with the active investor side and then switch over to the help people get money side.
Yeah, I think I started off in real estate investing in like 2012. I was buying very rapidly, and then I retired and I moved to Central America. And when
Nice. Whereabouts?
I was in but mainly between Costa Rica and Guatemala. Those were my bases, and then I sprinkled 10 other countries in between for shorter 2 month stints. But
Mm-hmm.
it was about 4 or 5 years. And so that was, and but in during that time, I was having issues with tenants, and I was just like, sell everything. I just don't. I'm retired. I don't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't know what was happening in Canada. I didn't know that I shouldn't be selling. It was probably the worst time to sell if I would have been paying attention. I was living life a lot. Values were a lot different. Principles
Yeah,
were
yeah, you're living the pura vida
yeah,
lifestyle.
Pura Vida, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So I had sold everything, and then I came back to Canada out of retirement for what I thought was retirement, and I actually
What
came
year was that you came back?
um 2000 and I don't want to say 16ish,
Okay.
2016.
Yeah.
And I came back and I had to start from scratch. Before I was working in oil, and then I retired, and now I come back to Canada. I was like, what do I do with my life? And so I was lucky enough to get on the Eglinton Crosstown. So Eglinton Crosstown is the largest LRT in Canada's history.
Yeah.
So I ended up starting with one station, ended up managing 22 people on that project, managing the whole project in terms of cost control. And so that was really cool, right? And I was like, all right, now it's time. Like I've been working there for a few years. I was like, all right,
I
it's
could
time to get back.
qualify for some
Yeah,
financing now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
qualify for financing. I was like, all right, let me look around in Toronto. What's happening here? And then I started looking. I'm like, wow, things are expensive in Toronto. And I'm like, okay, I want to go back. I always growing up, there's a place where I'm from, and it's like 400,000 will get you like a mansion. And I always thought that was going to be me. And but then I started looking at those mansions that were 400,000 in my mind only, but they're actually $1 million now. I'm like, oh man, what happened? So
Inflation. Yeah.
and I was
That's
on
that's
the
what happens when we get older, Paul.
yeah, that's exactly what happened. I was like, oh man, there are a lot more. So I'm on the COVID happened, and COVID was the best thing for me because everyone on my senior leadership team, they're from Texas, Louisiana, and all over the states. And these guys are working from home. And I'm like, why am I in a condo with a newborn, like basically a 2 year old, trying to teach him, or 3 year old, how to, go to school online. And so I had an epiphany. I was like, all right, I'm going to go see my mom and dad. I'm bringing my kid. I'm going to move back to where I was from. And I did that, and I worked remotely. And so while I did that, I realized like, I don't want to be doing this hustle bustle job anymore. They were taking everything I had. And I had no other extra brain power to actually focus on things outside of work.
Mm.
right? I have this theory that you really can't get rich or build wealth with your job. It can help you, but you can only go so far because they're going to be taking that 50 something percent taxes, and a
Yeah.
business is where it's at. So that got me into real estate. Within coming back from a few months, I bought a property, single family property, purchased for 380, turned it into 3 units, upper, lower, and then a additional dwelling unit. Even
Mm.
before I think a lot of people were doing them, refied it out and ended up getting all my money back plus my down payment plus
Yeah, you did a good burr.
another
Yep.
100 grand. Yeah. So that's what got me. I was like, wow, that's a good bird. So in that same year, that was January. And then by September, I bought another one and I did the same thing. Um, and then come another few more months later, I started another one. So I started this cycle of using the same exact money and figuring out how to do the right renovations.
Yeah.
And it led me into doing a lot of people were coming to me like, wow, you're buying everything around you, small town.
Yeah.
And so I started coaching people. So between my burrs and coaching people, I was doing a lot of mortgages. So that was like, I was like, I know more than my mortgage agent. Like, why don't I
Because you're
just do
probably
this?
working with a traditional mortgage agent who usually just helps mom and pops buy
Yeah.
their house and
Yes.
live in it for 10, 20 years and not for investors. That would be
Yeah.
frustrating, I would imagine.
Oh, it was so frustrating. I feel
Yeah.
like the reason I joined Lend City because Scott was, he was all focused on investors. And I had a deal that nobody could figure out, but he figured it out in 10 minutes. And I said that day, I'm like, I'm joining you. So I bought a
Mm.
property, it's 5 acres. And it's, you can develop it for sure. And it was, but everyone, no one could figure this deal out. He figured it out I was like, I need to know what you know. And that motivated me. And then I was doing all my mortgages and I was helping coaching people doing mortgages. I think I gave away about 20 mortgages in literally 3 years between the people I was coaching, my own mortgages,
Yeah.
and the PERS. And I was like, why give that away?
Yeah.
So one thing that was funny is like people, I've heard this, and they don't like investors, mortgage agents.
Yeah.
Mortgage was like for
We're
me, I'm
we're
like,
we're a pain in the butt for a traditional mortgage agent, but
yes,
they
because
don't
they're like,
understand. They don't really get it that, hey, you get this person in and then it's repeat, 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 repeat. Like
yeah.
it, I don't know. People are
whole
funny.
business model is based on building a relationship one time and then growing that relationship and actually adding value to the investor throughout their journey,
Yeah.
and then it will keep paying dividends and dividends. I have people that
So
have
when did you get your license to be a mortgage broker?
about 2.5 years ago.
Okay, cool, cool.
It's been about 2.5 years.
Okay, well, let's get to the crux of the matter because people want to know, okay, Paul, that's all great. How the
Yeah.
hell do you get me money to buy stuff in the States?
Okay. So it basically, one of the concepts that led us to the States, I can go there, is we wanted to grow with investor wherever they are.
Yeah,
So we started, we're in Windsor, we have an office in Toronto, but we're like, we need to go everywhere in Canada. So that's what we did. We figured out how to do lending in everywhere in Canada. So wherever they want to go, we'll go. And then we had clients saying, oh, we're going to go to the States. And we see the trend is this where you should be going in the States. And I can talk about why. So then we're like, we need to get there. It took us since I started, actually, it took a long time to figure out how to get to the States.
mhm.
And so that's what we did. And then it led us into Mexico, which we can go on. So if you are going to the States, the big thing is you won't find that if you own property in the States past 5 years, likely you bought it cash. And likely that I'll tell you right now, you can take out 75% of that equity that has probably grown, and it's not challenging. So when you start researching about US lending, you'll hear RBC come up. RBC can give you traditional loans in the States based on your income in Canada. But if you own more than 3 properties, they don't exist. And I mean 3 Canadian properties, or if like once you're
Any
at
combination of
3 properties,
three properties.
they will not let
Wow,
you go over 3, even if it's 3 Canadian properties.
wow.
So that didn't help anyone. So we wanted to know how can an investor build a portfolio in the States, and that's what we want to specialize in. So what we were able to come up with is we can use the property's income to qualify you for the property you're purchasing. And that's what's unique. So it's actually easier for me to get lending for Canadians in the US sometimes than it is in Canada because One, we figured out a kind of a structure of how you should structure your corporation, how you're going to get that bank account, how you're going to be able to do these things, how you're going to figure out the cross border accounting and the legal structure, and then how are we going to get you financing for it? So it's like we're really holding people's hands in the beginning.
That's huge, Paul, because I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed, and there's seems to be like 23 ways to skin that cat of how to structure things, and then it depends on who you talk to, and blah blah blah, and
Yeah.
double taxation and all that kind of thing. So if you've got that dialed in as a value add service for your clients or connections, or that's huge.
It's all because like our goal is to add value, right? And the
Yeah.
better we can get you to build and grow, the better our business is going to
Yeah,
grow.
yeah. The more
So we
mortgages
have to,
they're going to be doing. Okay, so let's pretend. I would imagine you've worked with quite a few Canadian clients on this now, because so many people, Canadians, are investing south of the border.
yes.
So let's just look at, no names or anything, but just like a typical client of yours. Let's say, can we say they're buying in Detroit? Does that seem to be Cleveland? I know is pretty popular.
Ohio's pretty popular. Yeah, Ohio's pretty.
Ohio. So let's say Cleveland, just for lack of, just
Yeah,
because people can get their head around there.
yeah.
So I'm a Canadian investor. Let's say I'm based in Ontario, and I want to, what are people typically buying? Single family homes, still small
Usually,
multis,
usually
residential.
fourplex, let's like fourplex, standard
Yeah,
four.
either way, it's probably going to be what we call in Canada residential, not commercial lending, right?
Well, we can do residential lending and commercial lending. We can do A lending. We can do B.
Exactly. But
So
let's
we
say
have it
a
all.
small
Yeah.
property like this in Cleveland, we're
Hmm.
looking to get financing for this. Okay, so
Exactly.
first things first, I don't have any other properties in the States. I'm just getting started with this. I'm starting from scratch. Typically, what kind of a structure are you recommending that people get set up as Canadians? Am I getting a corporation here and an LLC there and
Yeah.
tying them in, or what are you typically recommending?
So first thing is always it's a conversation to figure out what are your strategies, right? Because based
Yeah,
on or what are your goals? Because based on those goals, it would be a lot different. And it's like, are you using partners? Are you like so I think having that intake call is really important.
huge.
The first thing I like to do is I have that intake call. I figure out what kind of person are you, Dave? Like you're
Mhm.
my guy. I'm trying to figure out what are your motives? Where are you trying to get to?
Yep.
And then the people say, "Oh, I'm ready to buy." Well, you're not ready to buy yet. You're ready to buy once we have a legal person who we would send you to. You could have a free consultation, and they would actually say, "What are your goals?" and figure out based
Yeah.
on your goals, this is a legal structure we would actually. So it's a professional. I don't like giving professional advice outside of, I
You're not a
guess.
lawyer. Yeah. Got
Yeah,
it.
I'm not a lawyer, and I'm also not a tax accountant.
Mhm.
So the first step is getting your structure in place and figuring out what are you trying to achieve, and we would actually get you on that route.
Now,
Um,
is this with an American lawyer or a Canadian lawyer
yeah, good
or a
question.
cross border
So
guy?
yeah, so we have a Canadian lawyer and an American lawyer. So he is licensed in 4 different states in the U.S. He doesn't practice in Canada, but he is a consultant for any Canadians getting their visas, setting up corporations in the states, and those types of things. So he specializes in this. That's one of the many. It depends on the state you're going. We would
Mhm.
set you up with the right person.
Got it.
So that's number one. Number two, I always say is you need to go and get advice from a cross-border accountant. The cross-border accountant, we found that they're not always a cross-border accountant for
Yeah.
investors, right? There could be a cross-border accountant who just files. If you work in the States and the Canada, they could just file, but they don't know about corporate structure or how to set things up to be advantageous for a corporation. So we have specific cross-border accountants that we've grown relationships with, we've seen work. So that would be your second conversation. And then once you have your structure set up and once you've had the tax strategy set up, then we all it is your when you set up a corporation, you get a TIN number, which is like same thing as Canada in a social insurance number. And once you have that, now you're able to get a bank account and now you're able to move the money over. We season the money. The money has to be set over there for about 60 days for most lenders.
Mhm.
And now you're ready to buy.
So when you
So
say money, what are we talking about? Down payment money?
funds,
What do
funds
we,
for the
what kind
down
of?
payment and transaction. Yes. Funds for the town. Funds for the down payment, and in general any fees or any the excess to closing costs as well.
Right. So give or take, what percentage of purchase price are we looking at
Yeah.
needing to
So
come up?
the typical, it's between, you should be expecting between 25 and 35% down.
Okay.
It's pretty standard.
Plus
Again,
closing costs, or that's all in?
that's plus closing costs as well. One time. Closing
So,
costs can really differ. I would say you add another other point and a half to 2 points, maybe 3 points for closing costs.
so maybe say, just to be safe, have 40% of whatever the heck you want to be buying kind of lined up
Yeah,
in
that would be
cash in
the,
USD.
yeah, in USD for sure.
Yeah.
So we're making profit in USD, but then the entry point is in USD.
Yeah.
But that's typically what they're doing. A lot of people will, they're refining properties, they're using their HELOC,
Yeah.
depending if as long as they have an exit, those types of things for the down payment. But and a lot of things that a lot of times in the States, depending on the lender, right? This is so dependent because you're dealing with so many different states and there's so many little different nuances. So I speak in very like general terms.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they might even, some lenders might say, okay, we want to see that you have a year's worth that you can pay the bills in the bank account as
Mm.
well. Or they just might want to see that you don't have to have it in that bank account, but they want to make sure that you have access to it. So you could show a HELOC or you could show money sitting somewhere. That's another little thing that's a little different in Canada.
That would
Um,
make a huge difference. Yeah.
for sure. And then also, so what we do is we would give you a quote and say, all right, if you put 25% down, here's what kind of rate you can get. If you put 35% down, here's what kind of rate you can get. So we always like to give scenarios to help people make good decisions. One thing that's a little bit different than Canada is we can't tell you this is the exact rate that you're going to get because the rate is actually dependent on the property,
Hmm.
right? And so it's dependent on how much you're going to put down. It's dependent on kind of your characteristics as a buyer, but it's also dependent on the property. So what I
What
usually
what
do,
part of the property is it dependent on? Profitability
yes,
or
yes.
condition of the
So
property? Yeah.
it could be based on like what state you're in. It could be the city. Also, it could be based on how much obviously down you're putting. It's revenue and expenses we really care about. So how much revenue is the property bringing in, and how much expenses is it? And it's like DSCR. So they'd like you to be at 1.25. You're going to get really competitive rates if your revenue is bringing in 1.25 more than the expenses. But we could
And
actually
is
be,
that okay? So for a lot of Canadians, there's no way in hell it's going to do that. So are you seeing?
yes, yes.
No, that's not
It
typically a problem.
typically in Canada it doesn't happen anymore, at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the States, there's a lot of pockets where it does happen. And we would actually direct you on kind of, we can show you examples of where it's happening on a very common basis.
Yeah.
But we could even get you lending, even if it was as low as 0.75. So if you were losing money, we can still get it. It's just the
It's
rate,
going to be more
cost
expensive.
competitive. Exactly.
Yeah.
Another,
So, Paul, I know one of the big differences between the States and Canada, banking wise, is the sheer number of banks in the States. In Canada, we got the big five and then credit unions and a few other little things here and there. But there, it's like every corner's got a different private bank. So you must have to have relationships with a ton of them.
yeah, so that's the biggest thing. Like we're onboarding so quickly with so much. We're really trying to figure out what is our clients trying to achieve,
Yeah.
and then we need to make sure we have a plethora of products available to them. It's the challenging part is everybody's going in so many different states,
Yeah.
right? In so many different places. So
So many
you're right.
different cities and states. And yeah, exactly.
And there's so many different options. And some people like fix and flips, and some people like burrs.
Yeah.
And so there's so many different things, and there's so many things we can. So it's a lot of nuanced stuff. I think we're still like, do we have every single thing figured out? We
Of
don't.
course not. Is it?
Is it going to take a long time? I think it takes a very long time, but we have figured enough to get into residential and commercial. We have figured out enough to satisfy whatever you want. We might not have it, but we're going to figure it out how to get it, right?
Yeah, no, that's cool. I got a couple of questions as we're wrapping up here, Paul.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to hold you to this, but just big, broad strokes. When you're talking to a new potential client and they say, okay, Paul, sounds good. I understand I'm going to have to get set up with legal structures and cross-border accounting stuff and that sort of thing. You're going to put me in touch with these guys. Can you give me a range, more or less, of what I should expect to have to pay to get everything set up? Like,
Yeah, for
do
sure.
you have a, can you give people like just
Yeah,
a
yeah.
range there?
So legal structure, I've heard from most of our clients, it's between 2,500 and $3,000 Canadian.
Okay.
That's the major part.
And that's
And
for your US legal structure and your Canadian, or just the US side?
okay, so we didn't get into structure. So for structure, not many clients have had a corp in Canada and then a corp in the US. It's not
Okay.
needed.
All right.
You can definitely just own a US corp. Um, we talked a little bit about taxation. So as long as the tax system in US and Canada meet, you're not going to face double taxation.
Okay.
We found that it most likely meets during the corporate to corporate. You're
Uh,
paying corporate tax there, it meets there. We have found that some people like, oh, I want to buy in personal. You can do it, but sometimes when you're buying personal, it actually misses, meaning you'll pay tax in the US, the Canada will not acknowledge it,
mm,
and now you're paying double
double.
tax,
Okay.
right?
So basically, general big broad strokes. You, you don't need a Canadian corp. You get your American corp set up. You get the cross border accountant guy making sure that it's structured the right way.
Mhm.
So, so the legals maybe on the high side, 3 grand, 3,500, something like that.
Mhm.
What about the accounting side? Any ranges there?
The accounting side is more like the initial would just be like free advice is
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
how my tax guy says. But then on a yearly basis, you're
Mm,
gonna have to file some corporate stuff that will be a couple $100 from a legal standpoint, and then from a tax standpoint, you're looking at, I don't even know the number for how much you're looking at per year for a tax standpoint. It would be probably a little bit inflated compared to what you're already paying in Canada. Um, but I don't have an exact number of what you're
no,
going to
no, of course not. Inflated for
inflated
filing
meaning
taxes.
like if you were doing Canadian taxes, you're paying your accountant, it's probably a little bit higher
Okay, but
to
it's
do
not
that.
out of
Yes.
maybe a grand or something like that.
Yeah, it's around a grand because I haven't had a client come back and complain or anything like that. So
No, it's just I've heard such a range going all the way up to 50, $60,000 kind of thing. So if just to give people, hey, you know what? If you're doing it through here, chances are put aside 5 grand
yeah,
and
that's
that'll probably do you for
yeah.
what you need to do there. I mean, that's how my brain thinks. It's just a big broad story. Very, very cool, Paul. And as we wrap up, one last question. Okay, we talked about states. What about Mexico? Canadians wanting to buy stuff in Mexico.
Yeah, so Mexico in the States, it's all about we can use the property. One thing I didn't say is, we can use a property if it's Airbnb, if it's long-term rents, depending
Doesn't
however
matter.
we can just the cool thing about the States is it has so much data. So
Mm.
whatever we can justify the intended purpose is, we can use that for the revenue side. So that's
Even
what's
if it's not existing, currently
even if
creating
it's
that.
not existing, even if it's not
Ah,
existing. Sometimes we have to show your experience. Sometimes you're going to pay a little bit more on your maybe first flip or your first, but once you gain experience, then we can get you really competitive stuff. So
nice.
the reason I bring that up with the Mexico question is in Mexico, we're actually using your Canadian income to qualify you in Mexico. And that's the
With
big difference.
Mexican banks or with international banks in or like Scotia Bank is down there, TD's down there.
With actual Mexican banks. But it's using your Canadian income. So not
Interesting.
the international thing, like you're saying, I haven't got a Scotia or like
Yeah.
a big bank that would do this. We actually have lenders down
Mexican
here.
banks.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very, very cool. So you've made
So,
those.
but it's the caveat is they're using your Canadian credit, they're using your Canadian income, and where the U.S. it's literally they're using the property, they're using since you have a new corp, now you have a FICO, and they're assuming that your FICO is going to start off at 680, which is okay, and
Yeah.
over time that's going to grow. So that's like the big. I always put a
Yeah.
caveat. Yes, we have Mexico, but we are still using your because a lot of people that are going to the States also can't buy any, like they're stuck from a ratio standpoint in Canada.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So they see, I'll leave it there. You get
No,
the point.
that's cool, Paul. Hey man, I'm sure a lot of listeners are going to go, this is interesting. I want to talk more with this guy. What's the best way for people to connect with you, Paul?
I'd say the easiest initial, just send me a message on Instagram. It's Turnkey McAlli, MCALLI. Yeah, and then turnkey. I'm assuming you can get that one. But yeah, it's the easiest. Send me a message. We can set up a meeting, and the initial call is kind of where we work out these things and we see what's the whole goal is to give you an individualized approach to what you're trying to accomplish.
Awesome.
Trying to be a part of what you're doing, and that's kind of our goal.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a great service, and I take my hat off to you guys for finding all of these resources in the way of lawyers and a cross-border accountant people for your clients. And just I can only imagine the number of banks and stuff that you've had to connect with in the States to make this work in all the different places that your clients want to go. So
It's a
hats off to you
full-time
guys
job.
for doing that work. That's awesome.
Cool.
All right, everybody. Thanks for showing up, and we will see you on the next episode. Hey there, I really hope you enjoyed that episode. And as always, if you want to listen to more daily interview content, make sure you subscribe. And if you're an active real estate investor and you're doing deals and you'd like to get featured on this show, then just head over to daveinterviewyou.com. Now at moneypartnerformula.com, we help real estate investors to create a process for predictably getting capital so they can do more deals without relying on hard money lenders or the banks. We do this by building them a private capital marketing system. Now, if you want help turning yourself into a big money capital attraction machine, then book a call with our team to see how we can help. Just visit moneypartnerformula.com to find out more. All right, take care, and we'll see you on the next interview.